Hello and welcome to this construction technology webinar from KHL. It's great to have you with us today to look at Construction 4.0. What is it? What's driving it? And perhaps most importantly, is the construction industry prepared to adapt to it and adopt it? We have a terrific panel lined up to answer these questions, but before we get to them, a couple of things. Firstly, it would be great to get you involved. So please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions, and we'll try and get to as many as we can in the next 45 minutes or so. Secondly, a big thank you to our sponsors for today's webinar. They are Schiefer and Intelex. Many thanks to them for their support. Okay, so I think it's time to meet the panel. We have with us Ros Buick, Senior Vice President for Strategy, Product Development, Construction and Engineering at Oracle. Welcome, Ros.
Thank you.
We have Koti Vadlamudi, Senior Vice President and General Manager at Jacobs Engineering. Welcome, Koti.
Thank you, Mike.
We also have Dave Swan, Vice President of Products at Trackunit. Welcome, Dave.
Pleasure to be here.
Okay, so let's get straight to it. Ros, if I could come to you first. Obviously, Oracle, it's one of the companies at the forefront of the digitalization of the construction industry. And with that in mind, I'm interested to know if you're seeing a huge acceleration, a huge post-pandemic acceleration in the uptake of digital technology, or whether you're still finding construction a tough nut to crack as a technology firm.
Yeah, I think it's definitely accelerated in the post-COVID mode. I would say also was accelerating because of skilled labor shortages and the opportunity, to find more automated, more efficient ways of doing the work, even before the pandemic. But I would say it's the early majority as a whole, which means everybody knows they need to go digital, and the adoption rate is accelerating greatly. And we are recently excited to actually make progress with one of our key products to get to $1 trillion of processing through Textura, which is a huge milestone for us, and I think reflects the kind of acceleration we're seeing.
Right. Now, moving on to you, Dave. Trackunit, done a lot of research into how data is being used in the industry. The sort of stats that we're seeing are pretty staggering, actually, and somewhat worrying. We're talking about something like 95% or more of data captured in projects unused. We're talking about 30% of construction firms using applications that don't integrate together. And I'm hearing that 13% of teams' working hours on a project might be spent looking for project data. Is this a cause for concern? What does it mean in terms of construction's digital journey? Are we really at a very early point in this?
I think not. I think it is not a cause for concern. And I think maybe the most interesting way to think about the challenge you just described is that what we're doing here is we're on a wave that's building before it breaks. Right. And if you look at the momentum that we've gained through building the digital foundation over, say, the last 5 years, where we've seen this incredible uptick in buy-in and adoption of digital products and connectivity amongst the construction shared ecosystem, what we're seeing is a foundation being built. And it's okay that right now, all of these processes aren't organically digital, because what was missing was this foundation of connectivity and digital resources. And I think what we've done is we've built that underneath section of the wave, right? And we've pushed the water up. And so now we're in a position to start building those business level processes, right, around this great digital foundation. And I think that's what we're about to see happen. And that's why I think that you can see that contrast probably between the super positive adoption of digital technology from maybe a purchasing and maybe the OEM and the rental distributor level, and what's happening on the job site right now is that we've built the structure now, and now we can start executing in the day-to-day of how do we build a building faster? How do we be much more efficient in the way that we act.
Talking of that, Koti, if I can come to you, talking about productivity, I mean, Jacobs tackles a lot of very complex projects, which I'd imagine use a lot of digital technology. Are you actually seeing on the ground productivity upticks through the use of this digital technology?
Yeah, great question, Mike. And absolutely, we're seeing that. The projects that we're endeavoring to do now are complex. They're increasingly larger. So looking for more efficient ways to get to the end result is a big piece. As Dave talked about, I think there's a lot with the foundation that's been laid. But many of our clients are trying to figure out how to get to market faster with their product, shortening the cycle time for construction and even front end. So conventionally, we conceive of a design concept, we draw it, and then enable either ourselves or another entity to construct. We're looking at for ways to take the data, create the ecosystem where the data becomes the central piece inside of a database that then we can articulate into drawings that a constructor would then bid and build. But it's really going from a drawing-centric model to a data-centric model.
Right. Interesting. Ros, moving on from that a little bit, I mean, it's said that a construction site is basically managing on the edge of chaos. And with that in mind, is a truly connected site possible, especially when you've got data coming in from the equipment, from excavators, from drones, wearable tech, BIM, etc.? Is it possible at this stage to have a truly connected site?
Yeah, I think it is. I think one of the key philosophies that we subscribe to is this notion, building on what Koti was just saying too, this idea of having a core data backbone that you want to create your core business processes around, and ensuring that you're standardizing as much as you can those core project controls, scheduling, collaboration, document sharing, document controls and such. And we feel it's important that the industry actually has a series of these digital data backbones in the cloud that you can then plug a lot of the bespoke technology that sits out on these projects. You can't do everything for everyone from one provider of technology. And I think that this idea we've been building out in this, what we call the smart construction platform, which is really trying to drill the data out of the entire set of applications that you find on a project, but one that lets you actually plug into the third-party ecosystem of technologies, from wearables to reality capture, drone data, whatever it might be, labor, equipment, materials, IoT, and make it easier for all of the participants on a project to come into a more centralized data platform that's really designed for large quantities of data, is highly performant in the cloud, highly secure and compliant relative to whether it's GDPR or FedRAMP or any major compliance standards on security. And I think actually security is becoming one of the highest priorities for a lot of companies too, on the data going to the cloud. So there's a lot of data that's been left behind, I suppose, in the past from projects that you lose 90+% or so. But I think we just did a recent survey in the market, and a lot of customers are really wanting to get their hands around how to capitalize on that learning. It goes hand in hand with the loss of skilled labor leaving the industry. How do you upskill people faster? And one of the key elements to our platform is how do you drive intelligence and insight from both past data and current project data to do things like predictive scheduling, give people earlier warnings on how to mitigate the schedule and what's the real source of that delay before it gets too late. But any elements of the platform, any elements of the project can actually be used to drive that predictive insight. And I think, if you look at the survey we did, respondents are worried about equal parts, about 5 key factors: health and safety, supply chain health, material availability, worker availability, and cost overruns. And those top areas are sort of what makes the drumbeat, I think, for all technology providers to try and tackle with their applications. But yeah, this idea of a core platform, I think, is really important. This Oracle Smart Construction platform we're working on is really to connect our applications and create a single centralized common data environment that's open and accessible, working with the third-party tech that you inevitably get on a project.
So for me then, as a contractor, I could use this common data environment to pull together from different technology providers that I might be using on site.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as a company, thinking through what are my core processes I want to standardize is probably one of the hardest jobs up front, and the metrics to measure your company's performance on. And those data strategies are the foundation to then being able to, plug into any other plethora. It's inevitable when you go to one region, someone's got a favorite field technology, or there is a local dominant provider. So you have to have some level of flexibility, but a common core that lets you build your company's continuous improvement plan around. So I think that's the way the industry needs to be a little more flexible in how we approach things. It's difficult to be all things to all people on all projects as one provider.
Yeah. Koti, what about you from the contractor side of things? I mean, do you have experience of working with these common data environments, and how do they work? Are they successful for you?
Yeah, I think they're largely successful. And building on what Roz just said, the attempt to standardize workflows when we work with a client so that we can adopt the right tool is a big success factor. One of the challenges that I hear when I'm talking with trade partners or subcontractors is that some of those firms are quite small, maybe a little bit what we'd say mom and pop, and so their adoption of technology and the fluency of the tools and how we interact with them sometimes can be a challenge. But I think as an industry, the more and more we go down this path and journey of standardization and allowing the tools to enable us to get to those predictable outcomes, that's going to be a big factor in the success. But I think we're seeing the benefit for sure.
Yeah.
Construction timelines as well as efficiency at the work front.
This notion maybe leads us on to the sharing of data. We're talking about using big data, if you like. And Dave, if I could come to you, when we're talking about new construction technologies and new equipment, how important do you think this sharing of data is to drive that process so that we are developing in the right way?
I think it's more than important. I think it's critical. And I think that we're starting to see the approach of moving from what can my data do for me to how do I make it work with the solutions and the processes of my customers, right? So really, I think that a lot of construction is built on a shared economy and shared resources. Like essentially, when we look at the role of rental and construction and involving many trades and many different companies in any given project. So I think that this idea of collaboration is actually at the heart of our industry, and I think we can't get anywhere without an approach that sharing data in some way is actually necessary to be fruitful here. And we've started to see a turning of that corner. And I think the idea, again, that we're seeing some of the creators of the data points, right? When I talk about the integration of technology with OEMs and the people that are generating these data points to works with, right? How do I make this work with rather than what can I make this do?
Yeah. Interesting. I'll come to a question which has just come in, which I think is interesting. And it kind of lends itself to what you were saying earlier, Koti, about the mom and pop organizations. Is it only the big projects where sites are being truly connected, or is it happening also on small and medium-sized projects?
I think we're seeing it across the board. I think initially maybe the inertia is on the larger complex projects, but one of the interesting things is we see more owner organizations trying to deploy solutions in a standardized format. So if they have a global footprint, many manufacturing sites and locations, regardless of size, they may want to have unit operations look similar. And so they want to deploy a solution that they could replicate from location to location. So I think perhaps when we look at the big advantages in terms of monetizing efficiencies, often we think large capital project, but I think it would apply holistically across an enterprise from small to medium to large, as well as even asset management. We're talking construction here, but I think it's also applicable to operations and maintenance.
Yeah. A question here that I think might be applicable to all of you. I mean, if I start with you, Dave, are construction companies right to be concerned about the sharing of data? Obviously, we're talking about something that's imperative really for driving the industry forward, but is it legitimate to have concerns about what's happening with your data?
I think there's a couple ways to come at this question, and I think there's certain aspects of it that maybe get conflated. Like there's a question of data privacy and data security that will always be important and always needs to be carefully approached. I do think that we need to ask a question when and applying them to the way that we act and engage with data, which is which data is being shared, what would be the consequences to that data being shared, and what can we possibly miss out on by not sharing that data, right? And weigh both those sides. And I think that's something that we've gone through at a consumer level, all of us, right? When we think about things like Google Maps and Waze and applications that we all use every day that share very intimate data from our personal lives in order to provide us an immense benefit. And I do think it's an important question that we have to have a dialogue about, but I think it's equally important, it needs to be a point of focus to make sure that we're putting it in the right context and asking sort of those secondary questions of, is data sharing scary? The answer is actually that it can be, not just yes, right? And that what could we envision a world where we had data sharing in looks like, and then if we just say no, let's not go there, that can't be the right answer either, right? So
right. Ros, what do you think on this point? I mean, does there always have to be some element of compromise when we're talking about sharing data?
Well, I think Oracle's very, very focused on the whole security and privacy side of data, from ERP all the way through. And I'd say compliance to whatever standards you can ensure on security and privacy is very, very important as a foundation, whichever part of the world you're doing business in. And again, that's another reason it's quite costly to address that. So hence the core platform providers need to step up and provide that, I think. But I think that exactly what you were saying, Dave, is that if you don't empower the customer to understand the value of what they could be getting from their data, it's sort of easy to think it's not worth anything, but it's so, I think, powerful going forward to capture the value and mine it in some way for the next project or for the next employee to get better at doing their job. And I would say for us, we're certifying where we can, ISO certifying, also our common data environment, recently Kitemark, BSI, British Standard Institute. We feel it's important to always lead the front on, I suppose, that idea of keeping the caliber of what you're complying to front and center with anything we do with customers. And it has to be an opt-in approach. The customer has to be able to pick that they want to engage and get the value from their data, or potentially wider data sets than their own. And anonymous, it has to, of course, personal information, all that stuff has to be basically not in there. So I think the industry's got to go through a wave of learning around all this, quite frankly, and how we best do it. But I think, the AI and the machine learning is definitely there to enable us, and computer vision quickly becoming relevant in terms of how you capture information on the job site, whether it's drones and photogrammetry more traditionally, or it's even more low-cost sensors now to visualize with. The data and the volumes of data will inevitably drive AI and machine learning in many, many areas. And whether that's needing to share across the whole audience of constituents on a project, or just even within one customer's data set, I think there's still value there.
Yeah. Ros, if I could stick with you, but maybe shift the conversation a little bit. I hate banging on about the fact that construction is a bit of a laggard in terms of technology and also in terms of productivity. But I believe you've had some experience in the past of working in the agriculture industry, and I wonder whether an industry like that, which is definitely more advanced in terms of its adoption of digital technology, has got lessons for construction to learn from.
Yeah, really interesting question, I think. So yeah, not sharing my age or anything, but many years ago got involved in the precision ag game. There was a lot of confusion up front. What's the killer app? What we ended up realizing was the killer app was actually a very centralized control data information management strategy within the cab to win the cab as such. And it was all about steering or guiding the vehicle to be doing straight and parallel swaths, depending on the width of the equipment behind you. And it sounded very simple, but what that was great is that every vehicle needed that. And then once we secured that, it became sort of the data management backbone to then control seed, fertilizer, and chemicals. So I actually think the parallels to what I was just explaining before, now it's new technology, it's in the cloud, it's AI, machine learning, but essentially it's the same idea. You need a core data management backbone to be able to integrate to, and to be able to do that, it's quite costly to establish that in a viable way. But also just, one that can talk readily, APIs and such, but readily plug into the rest of the industry that you bump into as you go along around the world. And one of our key sort of test lab things that we do is the Oracle Industries Innovation Lab that we've been putting together to help us validate and test a lot of these concepts too, with customers and partners to actually show it off, I suppose, but also prove out and learn from. So yeah, I think the ag parallel is kind of interesting when you think about a core win the cab data backbone in a sense, but there wasn't a cloud connected at that point. They are now cloud connected because, of course, machine control is evolving to automated machines, and so the machine becomes a connected device too.
Right, very interesting. Coach, if I could come to you, obviously, one of the end games of using this kind of technology is to improve productivity and efficiency. But I'm just wondering, from your perspective and from Jacob's perspective, does construction also need to change to properly adopt this technology in terms of the actual methods of construction? Does that need to adapt in order to properly utilize this digital technology?
Yeah, I think I don't know how much needs to change. I think the technology, again, is an enabler for us. So conventionally, we use a BIM model in design to inform 3D space planning, eventually get to conventional 2D drawings for a constructor to build. How that gets divided up into construction work packages, how we utilize the data for material buying and equipment, and doing that in a way that the plan is laid out. So you can subdivide the scope of work packages into construction crew sizes for a work product for a day. And then thinking ahead of, all right, if this is the material that's needed, is it available? What's the visibility to the procurement schedule? And enabling the work crew to be as efficient as possible. And if you could think about these jobs that are, $1 billion, craft headcounts at, 1,500 plus people, we can use technology on the front end to, make the planning and the execution efficient. We can also use technology on the back end to make sure we're not stacking trades. So we can use wearable sensors to know where we have preponderance of activity and make sure we don't have conflicts of interfacing trades. So I do think there's elements of this where we're ripe and ready to deploy. Things are in place, and we're seeing a lot of the benefits of these enabling tools.
And what about modern methods of construction? Obviously, construction is dynamic and complex and will never be manufacturing, but is there an element of trying to move construction as much as is possible towards that manufacturing model?
I think there is. I think one thing that's super relevant today is all the supply chain disruption and labor shortage. So, the techniques that we would be looking at are how do you put things into more controlled environments, offsite, more modular fabrication, automation inside these fabrication facilities, the fluency between the design systems so that what we provide for a pipe fabricator to then use so they can spool ISOs and build. There's a lot of continuity there that, done well and done fluently and efficiently would cut time and provide more predictability on getting that module or pipe spool to the site and enabling better execution as well as safety. So I do think these are all elements that are very relevant today, given some of the supply chain challenges.
Yeah, Dave, coming to you. I mean, obviously, we're talking here about productivity and efficiency, but are you finding that the primary drivers for the adoption of this kind of technology are changing? Are they changing post-pandemic? Are they changing post COP26? Are you finding that people are coming towards technology for different reasons now than they did in the past?
I think that there was an interesting shift during the pandemic. Essentially, there was a separation from access to job sites and machines, and visibility physically made it more important to have a digital picture of what your work sites and what your projects were doing, right? And where your assets were at. And I think that what that did is it was probably a bit of a spark to ignite the pile of gunpowder when we talked about that wave building and breaking. I don't think that it's necessarily a separate category of motivations, but I think that we've seen them accelerated over the past 2 years. And a lot of the people that may have been looking and waiting and seeing of how this could benefit were forced to jump in with both feet and understand very quickly how this could benefit them and what Construction 4.0 could start to look like at its edge. And so I don't think it's necessarily a matter of a change in category of benefit, but an immediate exposure to that benefit. And I think that's given us a boost that's can be pretty useful as long as we take that momentum and carry it.
That's interesting. And going back to one of the questions I asked at the beginning, are you in that case seeing an acceleration of adoption? Have you seen a leap, or are we talking about just a steady growth in adoption?
Absolutely a leap over the past 2 years. And if you think about it in terms of the supporting functions of construction, like fleet management, right? All of a sudden I have millions and millions of dollars worth of assets distributed over a wide geographical area. And I need to understand where they're doing and when they're being useful and when they're need different operations done to them. And there's business processes surrounding those. And all of a sudden, digital technology became, the connectivity of those fleets became a necessity, right? For me to run a feasible operation. And then I think we're finding this in all different walks of life. Coming out of the pandemic, we're seeing a comparison there of the efficiencies that I gained out of necessity to the way things that I used to do things. And what have we learned about how to do things more efficiently? And now we're going to hang on to a lot of those efficiencies, because why on earth would we, let them go?
Yeah, absolutely. Koti, coming back to you, I mentioned COP26 then, and in and around all the talk about global warming, about climate change, there has been a lot of talk about ESG, sustainability financing, if you like. I wonder if that's something that's very much at the forefront of Jacob's adoption of technology, if you like.
Yeah, that's a great, super relevant question coming out COP26. And in the advanced facilities space that I manage, many of our clients in the manufacturing environment are big consumers of energy, whether it's electrical or chilled water systems. So there is just hypersensitivity to being more efficient. And so from a technology standpoint, they're looking at their utility plants, energy management, how do they operate the facility in a way that they're being energy efficient. We have some clients that are looking at alternative or cleaner power sources, whether that's unconventional hydrogen or even solar in some cases. So awful lot of emphasis now on designing systems that drive towards sustainability goals, as well as even going for certifications on the facilities, whether that's LEED certification or choosing materials that are more earth friendly.
Yeah. And is that something, Ros, that you're finding is also something that you're using as a driver to push technology more?
Yeah, I think what we're trying to look at it is essentially it's a data element to the process through planning, design, build, and operate, or construct, operate. We're really keen to collect the whole digital twin as a trajectory or digital shadow of the entire journey from portfolio planning all the way through the actual project and onwards to operations and maintenance. So it's a living, evolving thing. It's not one BIM model as such. And in that journey, we want to be handling all dimensional data. So flat files, 2D drawings, 3D models, 4D, 5D and such. And essentially carbon and embodied carbon becomes an attribute or against the geometry, if you like, or an attribute in the database. So to me, there's a lot of local carbon modeling that's going on, and wherever you go in the world, there's a different approach to how you do that. So I think there's a lot of evolution going to happen there, and that we just want to make sure that our platform can hold that information and be one of the key metrics by which a company can track their continuous improvement in this smart platform. And so, yeah, the digital twin is the output, I suppose, but we want to make sure that we put it within the wider context of the whole digital twin asset life as well. And yeah, I think there's a lot of change and learning going on around how to best capture that sustainability set of metrics yet that we'll all get to work through in the next 10 years, I would say.
Now staying with you, Ros, I mean, you mentioned digital twins there and BIM. And it wouldn't be a construction technology webinar if we didn't mention BIM, would it, really? I wanted to get your thoughts on whether poor old BIM is still really underutilized in the industry. Obviously, it has so much potential. Are we ever going to see BIM's full potential being used within the industry, right through the workflow?
Yeah, I think that the real rubber hits the road for BIM when it becomes really deeply embedded in the construction workflows. Having it up front in the design phase is quite good to see a pretty 3D picture and such, but the more you get it down to the high level of detailed BIM models that have exactly the last bolt, rebar ties, and super detailed to be able to drive quantities, scheduling, and the actual construction processes off that. We certainly are focused in that area with Aconex and how the model coordination is working deeply in construction workflow around the project. And I think that's sort of where BIM will become famous and favored again, I feel, because getting that super easy and practical to take to the field, how does it become accurate enough and making someone's job easier? I worked a lot on the HoloLens program in the past, and so, how do you make that so it's not getting in the way of them doing their job, but helping people or a subset of the people getting very accurate in context reality, the BIM model and the reality of the context of the building. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot happening there that's super exciting, and I think will be very very transformative in how BIM becomes more useful. But unfortunately, up till now, we've seen a lot of it stay up in the architect engineer space purely, or just to visualize where things are going to roughly go in 3D. And yeah, I think BIM is really, as you get to more automation as well, and machining and control, steel and various modular techniques actually are starting to do the combination of steel and concrete in a more modular fashion, and the whole automation and offsite manufacturing of some of that. BIM becomes very, very instrumental in all of that as well. So I think it's just had round one. It's coming into the serious round now.
Right, and Koti, from your perspective, do you think the way that BIM is being utilized on the ground is changing from Jacob's perspective?
I do. I think just to build on what Roz said, I think conventionally it's been 3D tools have been part of the design vernacular for a long time. Now connecting that to how do we advantage predictability in construction, the part of the construction plan. So the areas that we're currently exploring, it's not new technology, but it's building that into the system from the beginning, is how you could conceive cost and schedule, so 4D, 5D, and using the 3D model to advantage all of that in planning and execution. And when you've done that, actually, if you've done that on a project and you have that as a proof, you've essentially now, as if you're going to now cookie cutter that and deploy that similar solution in another location, you essentially have an as-built model for the entire project, including the execution cost and schedule. So there's just an enormous opportunity there, I think, in the industry to take advantage of technology, frankly, that's already available. It's a matter of implementing it, which speaks to our culture and the ability to adopt what's available.
Yeah.
Right. And now, before I move on, I've got another question come in. How do you see technology improving safety in the industry? Koti, maybe I'll stick with you for that one. What do you think about that?
Yeah, sure. So first, any topic on safety, I think, goes back to culture. I think whatever we solve holistically has to be, you have to create a culture at your sites or with your owner that align to culture. And so, not to get into a whole discussion of how you create that, but to me, that has to be the emphasis point. And then the tools and technology that would enable it, there's an awful lot out there. One that Jacobs deployed was available pre-pandemic, but became more pervasive across our sites, was a wearable technology called Ion. And we used that in pandemic, pre-vaccine. It was, applying social distancing rules of 6 feet apart. And so you could monitor when that breach occurred. A bit more strategic would be, I talked about stacking of trades, how you'd track and monitor that type of data to look at, if you have a large project with big construction staff peaks, you could look at the density of workforce in areas. From a safety standpoint, you would also look at it from if you had confined space or hazardous areas, you can track the appropriate compliance to permitting and access to those spaces. And then further to that, and it's more probably on the predictive side, we do a lot of human observations on safety observation reports, and you collect and sample all that data, essentially to inform when is the next accident, where and when is the next accident going to occur. So there's an awful lot of information that we could do on, predictive analytics to help take all that data, digest it, which conventionally has all been human horsepower. So I do think there's an awful lot with safety as well as productivity that we can tackle.
Right. I've got another question here from Matthias Hess. I'm not quite sure who I should ask this one. How do you plan to align the lifetime of digital technology with the much longer lifetime of the construction machines? Is that a question that, Ros, you look like you want that question.
Oh, well, I'm thinking, I'm trying to think my background. I've experienced some of this question in the machine control context, I think it's no different to when you buy cars with technology in them, right? The old radios versus the latest Teslas with the great big screens in them. To some extent, you either upgrade in a retrofit fashion, or you buy brand new, right? And it comes with the new embedded equipment. And there is going to be, and I think there is, a secondhand market to some degree on some of that technology, but the good thing about software is it's not physical, so you can actually get a lot more benefit, perhaps more readily. And I think, physical machine assets are an interesting thing in themselves, because I think with more automation going on with machines, potentially less operators to operate them, right? Where does that go with even the lifetime of a current machine? Does the machine design change significantly? Cabless equipment, for example, I know is very much been looked at. So yeah, I think things are changing on all fronts there.
Right. I've got another question here from Sabir Sheikh, who says, construction work often takes place in remote, harsh environments that are not well suited to hardware and software developed for the office. Hence, construction businesses end up with little to show for their technology investments. I wonder if this is actually a question about 5G and what a difference 5G might make to the uptake of digital technology. Do you think there are companies who are waiting for the rollout of 5G to invest? Dave, what do you think about that?
I think I'm going to give the least exciting answer to this question, which is I think there is like an incredible potential with 5G and the new types of services that we might be able to offer in terms of connectivity of assets and machines and these things with 5G. But I do think that the hurdle rate now and where we can make the biggest progress is on our approach and attitude and developing organically digital processes, right? So I think there's maybe two parts of the answer then. One, absolutely, there's super exciting things coming with 5G, and it does open up a whole new world of different capabilities that we'll see in connectivity and digitization. But I don't think that we're waiting on that. I think that that story I told about a wave that's already been built and is ready to break doesn't rely on the next generation of connectivity as much as it relies on us now having a foundation to create a construction industry that's digital from the inside out.
Okay,
Mike, I might build on that one just to comment. I just read an article this morning, and I think the statistic, there's between India and China 1.3 billion people that are not connected. So I think it is a challenge. I think the rollout, not just of 5G, but just cloud infrastructure that enables these tools, so that we're not just doing the conventional plug and play, is an opportunity.
Right. Okay. So if 5G isn't the most exciting thing that's due to hit technology, what is? I'd like to ask you all. What do you think is something that's really exciting you about technological advances right now? Koti, can we start with you?
Yeah. So the one, across the markets that we serve, the one common denominator that I see across many of our clients is they're trying to meet some gap in the market, whether it's semiconductors or capacity for data centers, and they're trying to get there faster. And they have the solution. It's just how do you deploy it quicker? And so there's this theme of templating the design, creating a digital model, and then how do they replicate that as fast as possible? And often the inhibitor of that is people wanting to refine something that's already working. And so we get in our own way. So I think there's a cultural piece there. And the second then is what we've been talking about is what are we going to adopt technology-wise to enhance that predictability and get to market faster. I just find that all of our clients, owner organizations, are interested in addressing that problem. And as I mentioned before, with some of the supply chain disruptions, I think it's even more relevant now. So I'm quite confident. I think sense of urgency will help the industry kind of solve this one. That's kind of my passion area.
Brilliant. Ros, same question to you then.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many technologies out there all popping up and innovating on the edge of construction here. But I would say one of the most exciting things, I think, is actually the combination effect of all of these technologies coming together. And I think that's actually what the industry needs to help make it more cohesive. One of the biggest problems, as we've touched on, is the change management problem in a company. And how do we help companies make that shift to be more digital and really understand that it has to come from the executive sponsor down, and we are going to go digital. What's our core competencies? What are the metrics we want to be continuously improving and tracking in our data strategy? And then what are the core platforms that we need to pick to standardize around, and then allow a level of flexibility in the regions on the projects? I think construction moneyball is a word I like to use, because it's kind of going to that movie. We're using analytics in the industry to better measure what gets measured gets managed, right? So I think that the combination of integrating our technologies, cloud, web, mobile, but also all the different site tools that can be fed into that data environment, to me, I think it's the most, and of course, AI and machine learning technologies maximizing off all of that. I think that integration is where things have accelerated a lot in recent times, and will be a turning point to make it much easier for companies. There's an inevitable change management piece to it, though, that we got to help customers see too.
Yeah, I like what you're saying about AI. I'm not sure that I find change management a particularly sexy phrase, but we'll go with artificial intelligence. Dave, what about you? What about you? And you're not allowed to plug your own products here.
No problem. But I will say that I'm pretty excited about the explosion we're seeing in machine intelligence and connectivity, right? So I keep going back to this idea of a foundation being built. And if I go back even 4 years, there's an interesting problem where half of the machines on any given construction site couldn't tell me when they were working or when they were not working. They had no way to convey that through analog or digital means. And we've sort of crossed this barrier that we saw in the automotive industry, where now, you know, if we can imagine back to the time when I took my car into a mechanic and they sort of banged on some parts with a wrench and turned it on and listened for vibrations to figure out what was wrong and noises. And now they plug into the port and they're told what's wrong by a computer. And hopefully that has made our life a whole lot easier when it comes to getting our car repaired. So all of a sudden, I think we're at that tipping point with the much wider and diverse world of construction machinery, where even things that we would have considered at the edges of feasible application for that kind of intelligence are moving towards that kind of capability to output details on when I'm being used and how efficiently I'm being used, and what else can empower efficiency on the construction site than that kind of data. So that we've seen that become standard over the past 4 or 5 years. And I think that is going to change the capabilities when I start building this larger picture of a work site and efficiency and systems and database integration that Cody and Roz are talking about. That's got to be there as part of it, and it's there now, and it's going to be there. So super exciting time.
Brilliant. We're running very short of time, but I've just got one more question come in. It's for Ros, building on from Ros's comment about the combination of technologies being the most exciting, where does she think virtual reality can lead construction to?
Ooh. Well, I'm actually a big fan of augmented reality, or mixed reality, they sometimes call it, because it puts the visualization of, say, a BIM model in the context of the real world when you're out on a job site. And I think that's one of the big, as we said before, there's a lot of efficiency gain to be had on a job site in construction. Virtual reality is a bit more like full immersion, and you're inside of another world. The gamers love it. And of course, you can use it for things like showing owners the design and walking through buildings virtually before you build it with bricks, do it with pixels. So I think virtual reality has a part to play, obviously training and getting people educated quickly on whether it's servicing equipment or any kind of training material can be used with virtual reality. But I think augmented reality is one of the perhaps more important angles when you're talking these reality things, and I think has more opportunity for more applications on a construction project. But what's cool about that space, of course, is the advances in performance and accuracy are just going to keep going up and up there. And yeah, I think third generation will be pretty amazing.
Great. Look, I really appreciate that. It's been a terrific discussion, and we could go on and on, but we are definitely out of time now. So a huge thank you to Ros, to Koti, and to Dave. Thanks very much for joining us today. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, thanks, folks.
Right.
So it just remains for me to once again thank our sponsors, Schiefer and Intellex, for making this discussion possible. Thank you very much to them. I should also say that if you missed any part of this webinar, a link to a recording will be available in the next few days, and the recording will also be available on khl.com. Thank you once again for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it, and we hope to see you again soon for another construction technology webinar from KHL. Thank you and goodbye.